Alright, another draft physics video presentation. Yeah. Um, alright, so maybe a comment. One of them. Not much of a comment though, so probably no point. And then another two-slit video, piece of one. That's just so glaring. I think I did it years ago, but now I have even more ammunition to, information, more facts to critique it against, which, and it doesn't survive well. And it gets to this whole argument of, are they really lying, or is there some other way to look at it? Are the errors and the inaccuracies so extensive that you really can't call it anything but a pile of garbage and propaganda and lies, in support of, in a fake effort to fake the evidence, to fake the argument, to, shore up something that just can't be defended. It's just too desperate. It's not much different than, God botherers inventing miracles, telling us grand stories about how somebody's arm grew back or something, to prove God exists. It's a miracle. So it's not any better than that. So, frankly, it's just lying for the purpose of deception. So anyway, and that's, we'll get to that. So I guess I'll do the stupid comments first. I have some email comments, just so the people who don't think I'm totally ignoring them. A couple from Jerry Hall, really stupid. So I'll make videos on those subjects, just because it's this idea. I've said all this stuff in videos. I've explained things pretty thoroughly. And they imply like there's something missing from the explanation or something, and I just don't really understand how that's possible. So I guess I'll have to make videos on even more specific subjects, like up and down or something. It's like you really do have to go all the way back to grammar school kind of level, and you really shouldn't. So this is sort of just a fake obligation they're creating, where I have to go all the way back to stuff they should already be able to figure out all on their own. But anyway, it's just more evidence of the suck of people. They're just belligerently, and you're just belligerently stupid. You're not trying to be something else. Alright, so to the comments. We'll do that first. Okay. So this is the link to the Brian Greene video. It refers to probability of electron position. Yeah, well, it refers to an experiment that didn't happen. And, they don't have any, there's just no evidence for what they're saying, so it's just kind of silly. But the whole probability thing doesn't mean anything. We know that all systems have probabilistic outcomes. There's a probability of your engine failing, and a probability of every single thing, there's probabilities. And they're built into the systems. The systems have these probabilities, like the roulette wheel, or the dice table, or wherever you want to go. You'll find there's probabilities. Now, they didn't predict any of these probabilities before seeing the experiment. No, they saw the experiment, they see that it has a probabilistic outcome, and then they give you a formula that allows you to calculate the probability based on knowing everything there is to know about the system. And then they call that, we predicted it. That's just part of their lying. It's just so silly to talk about predictions you make that have nothing to do with actually predicting anything. They have no formula that shows up and can deal with the circumstance without knowing everything about it. That's the truth of it. So I can do that. I don't need the formula. I can watch it and figure out what the probabilities are, and then predict the outcomes, probabilistically. I don't need any mathematics at all. I don't need Schrodinger's equation. I don't need any of that horse shit. I just have to write down a piece of paper and then look at it. Say, oh yeah, there's a pattern. Yeah, more things go down the middle than go down the sides. Yeah. That's it. So again, it's just part of this fake, this fake qualitative you know, argumentation they create. Like they have really good evidence when they have really bad evidence. All right, and then this other asshole, it's one of these comments. It's not the 80s anymore, LOL. I mean, the LOL part is you're making a style judgment, okay? Which is, it isn't the 80s anymore, and those kind of judgments are frowned upon as being just kind of just bigotry. What's your problem, exactly? You're worried about my style? It doesn't please you? So, having long hair now is as bold as being, wanting to be a raccoon. Come on, get real, fuckhead. But anyway, it's just, and then this is from somebody who's not showing us what they've chosen as a style, right? So he provides zero information about his superior way of living, his superior style, whatever that is. 2020 style? I don't know. Well, what exactly is his decade of style? And then the obvious fact is it's not 80s, it's 70s, jackass. Okay, so, through most of the 70s, this is the same hair I had, asshole. And that's all it's about is the hair. And, the fact that maybe I'm a 2%er, blue eyes and blonde hair. We're a dying breed, and I guess he just wants us to die faster, because he's resentful. That's what it comes down to. What, I'm not bald, like you? It's just so pathetic an argument to make. I mean, again, most people who have lived in these other decades would say, oh shit, at the time I thought the 80s were fail. I mean, Reagan, disco, square cars. I mean, there's a lot of downsides. But compared to now, it's such a fucking win. I mean, yes, if I had the choice to take the 80s road right now or just live in the 2020s, yes, without even thinking about it, I'm going down the 80s road. Yeah, because your road sucks. I mean, the world's gotten ugly and pathetically stupid. Ugh. Cringe. But anyway, I mean, it's just such a dumb fucking comment. You're just like, man, this is the stupid shit walking around thinking they're something. You are not making the standard of human, buddy. You're just not doing it. Alright, this kind of crap is worthless shit. You're just farting your way through life. Pathetic. Ugh. Ugh. I mean, it's just, ugh. Anyway. Alright. So, I'll interrupt myself. To say, the video failed because I tried to go to the drawing board and then I had to say, oh, it's not enough contrast, and I tried to fix it and that was a mistake and everything went to hell. So anyway, I didn't want to remake the videos, and I had already deleted the comment and all that kind of crap, so I said, what the hell, I'll just play the video. And that actually seems to have worked. Hopefully. So let me see if I can get rid of that, whatever the hell it is. There. Yeah. Okay, there's the drawing board, and now I just need Firefox to show up. So I guess I get rid of this, and there it is. Yay! Alright. So, back to the usual thing, and we'll start where I left off, hopefully. I mean, we'll start where I'll begin, from the beginning. So anyway, this is a clip, 6-minute clip from, it's some kind of, whatever, infomercial science video documentary thingy that Brian Greene did a number of years ago, or whenever, and I don't remember the actual title. Of the whole thing, and I probably should play the whole thing because this is so bad that the rest of them must be really bad, and I probably already did play some of this, but anyway, it's just such a bad argument.
We can get a pretty good feel for the double slit experiment and how dramatically it alters our picture of reality by carrying out a similar experiment. Not on the scale of tiny particles.
He just talks like he's just talking to 2-year-olds, and he has to emphasize everything. It's just so bad.
But on the scale of more ordinary objects, like those you'd find here.
Yes, analogies are really important in comparing things and understanding, metaphors, analogies, whatever, whatever you want to call the little different words we have for show something else and show how it compares. And that makes sense. It's a rational thing to do. But you're not doing it honestly. In waves, the single slit in water doesn't match the single slit in light. It's just the truth. Your wave theory fails. Same with the multi-slit. You don't get the same results. You don't get the same results in the double slit in the sense that the double slit in light has two patterns. So you just ignore what the analogies are saying, the comparisons, and then you sit there and straw man the argument and say the only way we can understand particles is one bowling ball. A particle is a bowling ball, and that's it. When your own photon description of waves has more than one wave in it. A photon isn't one wave. It's not just one wave. It has a frequency. There's a frequency between the waves. So obviously the analogy should have something to do with things that have more than one component, and you can't even get that right.
Here in a bowling alley. But first, I need to make a couple of adjustments to the lane.
Yeah, so let's do our little gimmicks. Oh, yeah. Intelligent people love that gimmicky stuff.
You'd expect that if I roll a few of these balls down the lane, they'll either be...
Yeah, well, that would be the thing to do, is to roll a few at a time, because that would indicate a frequency, wouldn't it? Yeah, and if you were going to make waves, you'd make more than one wave front, wouldn't you? Yes, you'd put more than one wave front through the experiment. So the analogy should be to the nodes of the photon, the waves, right? So one bowling ball shouldn't equal 10 wave fronts, should it? I mean, is that the way it's supposed to be seen? The only way you can understand it? Or could you understand it that, no, it should be 10 little bowling balls in a row? And they should have a polarization. That means they should be staggered in their position.
Stop by the barrier, or pass through one or the other slit and hit the screen at the back.
I mean, this is just so dishonest in the sense he's throwing a ball at two slits and saying there's only two choices. You either go through the slit or you don't go through the slit. There's no third choice where, yeah, you sort of hit the edge of the slit and the ball goes off at a funny angle. Scatter. No, that's not possible. They ought to just have duh music. Duh, 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 duh.
That's just what happens.
No, it isn't just what happens. So it's a complete lie, right? We know it's a complete lie. There's not two choices, through the hole or no through the hole. We know those aren't the only two choices. We know hitting the side and deflecting is one of the choices. Oh. Shit.
Those balls that make it through always hit the screen directly behind either the left slit or the right slit.
So again, if he really did the experiment, we really know that's not what would happen. There'd be a bunch of balls in the gutter. They'd be making holes all over this place. The whole thing would be one big shit. It'd all be knocked down and there wouldn't be anything there anymore.
The double slit experiment was much like this, except instead of bowling balls, you use electrons, which are...
Okay, so that's not what the double slit was done with. It was done with light first, okay? For more than 100 years, it was a light experiment, nothing else. And now he's saying they did the double slit with electrons. They didn't do it. It's a frickin' lie, okay? So just understand, they did nothing comparable to a double slit experiment. Nothing.
Billions of times smaller.
Right, so he's conceding they're smaller, right? They're not just billions of times smaller than, like, an atom. They're billions, a bowling ball. They're millions of times smaller than a photon, because a photon has polarization. Electrons don't. So they're really, really small. So how do you build slits for something that small? This is where I was going to the drawing board.
You can picture them like this.
Well, and it'd be retarded because that's not a billion times smaller, is it? No, it isn't. It's not even close to a billion times smaller than a bowling ball. It's like 1/10 of a bowling ball, not even close to a billion.
Let's see what happens if I throw a bunch of these balls.
Alright, so just a complete lie. It never happened. Nothing even close to this happened. Bell Labs did some sort of experiment with a crystal that had an etching on it of some kind. I'm not sure. I mean, if somebody can find the documentation for these experiments, that would be interesting. So it's a Bell experiment that happened in whatever, 1920 or something, I don't know where they shined electrons by accident on a surface and they got a pattern. Now, it's not the two-slit pattern, right? I mean, it doesn't have two patterns built into it. So it's not the double slit pattern in light. So that doesn't work. But the fact is, it's not two slits either. So why is he saying this is the same thing? I mean, and I've already made this argument, and I'll make it again. And this is, hopefully we won't have a freaking failure here of some kind. I don't know what the contrast isn't quite right on the camera for some reason. So hopefully this will be viewable. Alright, so that's the blackboard. This is my hand. So I should find the middle. That's the middle, way over here. Okay. Alright, so electrons are really small. So again, compared to a photon, an electron is really small just because a photon has very large polarization. Maybe 1,000 atoms, maybe 500. Let's just say 500 atoms worth. It doesn't matter. And you can understand, right? You can understand. I don't know why the frickin' light is just not right. It was fine yesterday. Why is it not right today? All right. So photon big, electron very small. And really small because it's part of an atom. So you can sort of understand that we can't build slits. We can't we can't build slits for electrons. There's no way to send electrons through two slits that would be at all comparable to sending these big giant photons through slits. And you can understand that. We can't atomically. There's no way to do it. And then we know that the surface is going to be charged with electrons. There's going to be electrons in all these surfaces, and you're sending an electron that's charged through surfaces that are charged, and that's going to screw everything up. So, even if you could do it, and you can't, because obviously these are atoms, and with electrons, how can you create a narrow slit for an electron? It's just impossible to, create a confinement for an electron, because any amount of space is a huge amount of space for an electron. So there's no mechanics here. There's nothing to make sense of it. I mean, they just want to keep saying that the same electron went through both slits and did this interfering thing. And, even that's just too silly that is such an extraordinary claim that, and they don't even have anything close to ordinary. So they didn't even do this experiment. They did one in an electron microscope, where they tried to synthesize this out of gold and all that stuff. But there are lots of failures in that experiment, and the pattern sucks. So it's hardly any kind of hard evidence. But what they did, what he's calling the same experiment, what he's calling throwing a bowling ball through two slits, is shooting a beam of electrons that are full of gamma rays and other things, of course, at a surface, and then looking at what reflected off the surface, what's scattered off the surface. That's the experiment he's talking about. So, how is that the double slit experiment? It's just not in any way can be described as that. There's no evidence that was just bars on the surface of, slits or anything, and there was no evidence that they hit two slits or they did any of this. It's just a complete fabrication, it's a lie, right? What else do you call this crap? It's lying. He's just lying to the public, pretending they have evidence of this when they don't. They should just stick to photons. This whole pretense that everything does the same thing is just an insane stretch of the evidence.
When electrons are hurled at the two slits, something very different happens on the other side. Instead of hitting just two areas, The electrons land all over the detector screen.
Just like the bowling balls would, technically. You could argue if they're of a certain mass and the steel was of a certain strength that you were hitting, there would be probabilities of outcomes. So again, it's just creating a system that has enough variance in it to create, and has limitations, like bowling balls don't break, and bowling balls, can only deflect a certain amount. There's only so much deflection possible in the metal, and blah blah blah. But anyway,
creating a pattern of stripes.
Right, and we know this isn't the double slit pattern, so there's just no point in having the conversation. In a sense, they won't even accept the real pattern's existence. So we know the real pattern fades away, then starts up again, then fades away, then starts up again. We know there's two patterns in the double slit experiment in light, and you just can't have different results and say they're the same. It's just not fair to the evidence, and anybody fair-minded ought to concede this is a horrible distortion. This is not the truth. It's some other story. And it shouldn't be provided as evidence. Your evidence should be real. It shouldn't be a story you made up. And so all you defenders of this classical model, you still can't you can't admit that this isn't good enough evidence. That you shouldn't be making bold claims about actual facts, on evidence this poor.
Including some right between the two slits.
All right, even that's too silly, right? To taking this camera view. So, we'll have to go back to this one is a simple argument. I just can't understand how they can say this stuff and get away with it, and it's just so obviously stupid. Oh, I don't have my proper eraser in hand, so I'm guilty again. Ah, there it is. Oh, and I dropped my chalk. Oh, this. I want to. Okay, underproduced video, I have to admit. All right. So where was I now? The point is, yes, this perspective. He's looking at things. So we know that when you do this two-slit experiment, that the slits are tiny in terms of the space they're occupying, right? It's just tiny, tiny, tiny. And you're projecting the image on a screen. And obviously you should be projecting it on a screen of equidistant, if you want to get it. Oh, that's way too high. All right, so we'll put these down here. I can put them way down here. Wow, cool. All right, so two little slits. All right, and we know we should project it on an arc screen that's equidistant. And these 2 points are so close together that your pattern, just that first initial bar, is going to be huge by comparison. So there's no the pattern is, this slit can't, this is tiny, this is always going to be 1 millimeter, all right, and this can be 6 inches. So how can they play this game that there's any significance about this pattern consuming any part of the pattern, when clearly it's only 1 tiny millimeter. It's this little tiny space. It doesn't occupy any more than that. That's all there is. There is no consuming part of this whole bar pattern is part of what's inside of this point of view. But this doesn't spread. The pattern spreads. But the light that goes straight through doesn't spread. So it's only 1 millimeter here. There's no difference. And if I have one slit and it projects an image, it's going to project it within that one millimeter. You wouldn't be able to see the difference. So if I just shine light through one slit, it would look like it's in the same place as the other slit, but you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them. A ½ millimeter difference. You wouldn't see the difference in 6 inches of a ½ millimeter change. So it's just such a distortion. Ugh. Horrible. I hit the thing. Okay, there we go. So, continuing.
Very place you'd think would be blocked. So
the 1 millimeter slit difference, and with electrons it has to be a billionth of a millimeter, obviously wouldn't consume these dark bands. Okay, it would be inside. It would be one little blip inside the middle band, and that's all. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with any of the dark spots or any of that crap.
What's going on? Well, to physicists, even in the 1920s,
So he says 1920. So it's the Bell Labs experiment. Again, no slits involved, no shooting through an obstacle at all. Nothing went through anything. It's just about electrons scattering off of a surface. Not the same experiment. It really just isn't the same experiment.
pattern could mean only one thing.
So again, we're back to this only one thing based on my idiotic premises. So we know that if I did take a stream of particles, if I did say light was a composite object like what you would draw as a wave. Sorry, I have to keep doing this switching thing. Yeah, I'll get used to this eventually. All right, now what was I talking about? Oh, okay. So look, when they draw a photon, they draw this, right? So I mean, we know we're talking about wave fronts, right? So if you draw it as a wave, it would be wave fronts, many of them, more than one, lots of them. Why did I throw where did I put it? There it is. Yeah, there'd be lots of them. So why wouldn't I think the same way if I'm going to convert the notion of a photon into a particle theory? I'm not going to make one blob and say that's a photon. No, I'm going to make a bunch of blobs, okay, nodes, quanta. So I'm going to have a blob and a blob and a blob and a blob. And then we know that the photon actually has polarization, so then I know that there's a spread in where the blobs are. They're all going this way, parallel to each other, right? They're all going this way, parallel. And we know this is their frequency, okay? So that would be the right model. And now you throw that through slits, okay? So now you make your slits, and you're going to throw, more than one particle through. Then you could understand that, here's the particles. I didn't put them out of alignment. I really should, okay? Because they are polarized. You could sort of understand that this one might crash right into the barrier. This one will go right next to this surface and it might get scattered that way. This one will go straight through, and this one will hit this other surface and scatter over there. And we know that this is going to be happening on both surfaces, and that basically the scatter is going to be a fairly even pattern. Like I said, you'll be more likely to scatter, off the norm. So this would be more unlikely, because you have to hit more than one electron to scatter that much. And it would now you're just saying what's on the opposite wall. Okay, what made it to the other side? Well, I don't need that. I could just go lower. So, so if I just make the slits, and I just say, and the math completely supports this. These are the point sources, and basically you could just say it scatters off of these point sources, the surfaces. So the little things are going in, okay, and they're all scattering. And the fact is that at some points on the screen, they'll be in phase. That is, a piece from over here will be in phase with a piece from over here, and it'll reconstruct a photon. And likewise, all the other locations where you have possible in-phase connections. And the real trick is that if you take these two vectors, they'll create the envelope, okay, pattern, and these two vectors will create the little bits. So the size of the little bars will be dictated by this distance, and the size of the big pattern will be dictated by this distance. That's what's consistent with the math. That's the story they could tell. That's the theory that does actually work, and it's made out of particles. And a mechanism we know happens, which is scatter. Now, this won't work with electrons, because a single electron obviously isn't a composite object, and it doesn't obviously have any polarization or any of that stuff. So, but again, the point is they didn't do the electron experiment, because frankly, you can't make a slit for electrons. It's not possible. You can't make a confinement for an electron. Just not possible without making atoms do it. You have to make it out of single atoms. We can't control single atoms. Even if we could control single atoms, it wouldn't make a slit. So, I mean, it's just really bad. So dishonest.
Waves. Waves do all kinds of interesting things. Things that both...
Waves are emergent objects. They only do anything because they're made out of something. And how sticky the stuff is really the whole story of waves. So the little bits have to stick to each other. So they're basically saying that there's some sticky glue underlying the universe. It has to be some sticky stuff. Because sand won't work, right? So if I make ether out of sand, well, waves aren't going to go anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to work. So, bad analogy, and, there's just no evidence. The evidence doesn't indicate waves.
Bowling balls would never do.
So again, he says bowling balls wouldn't do it. Well, sure they would. Baseballs would do it. So if you make a photon out of 6 baseballs, yeah, they will do it. They'll scatter.
They can split. They can combine. If I sent a wave of water...
And again, that's exactly... The wave of water is made out of a bunch of particles. It's made out of a bunch of matter, atoms. Atoms are doing all of this stuff, little bits of atoms. And so you could just understand that clearly particles works. I mean, particles can do these things. But obviously sticky ones, no.
Water through the double slits. It would split in two, and then the two sets...
So we know that the 2 doesn't work, okay? The math for 2 waves will not produce the double slit pattern in light. So we know it fails. And we know they didn't do it with slits and electrons. So why are they telling the story this way? It doesn't work first. I mean, it's overtly wrong. 2 waves won't make the double slit pattern, so it doesn't work. And again, I can just go back to the single slit and just point out how it doesn't work at all. The comparison of water going through a single slit won't produce anything like the pattern produced in light. So it's clearly a surface experiment. For waves, it's about a slit. For photons, it's about surfaces. The single slit for a photon is the 2-surface experiment.
Waves would intersect. Their peaks and valleys would combine, getting bigger in some places, smaller in others, and sometimes they cancel each other out.
And again, it won't work. This model doesn't work for the double slit. So that's why he changed it to electrons maybe. But again, the fact that it hasn't been done with electrons just makes the whole argument moot. I mean, this shouldn't even be an argument.
With the height of the water corresponding to brightness on the screen, the peaks and valleys would create a series of stripes and what's known as an interference pattern.
Right, which also fails because guess what? In water, the brightness isn't anything like what happens in light, which is a huge diminishment in the intensity as you go further away. And the only reason why that happens in water is because of distance. So if you make it equidistant, they would have equal brightness. So again, the 2 patterns won't match again. I mean, if you do it on a curved surface in light, okay, it still diminishes as you go further away. In water, it wouldn't. Because the only reason why it diminishes in water is because you're traveling a longer distance and the water runs out of energy.
So how could electrons, which are particles, form that pattern? How could a single electron end up in places a wave would go?
It doesn't. So, a wave doesn't do it, and first off, and no. I mean, obviously, it just depends on what you say a particle is. So again, with light, we know it's a composite of waves. It's a sequence of activities that take place, and you're just reconstructing phase. You can't see it as 500 nanometers if it's not 500 nanometers anymore because it's out of phase. So if I combine 2 things that are out of phase, I don't have 500 nanometers anymore, I have some other frequency.
Particles are particles, waves are waves. How can a particle be a wave?
So they got all the other little talking heads to say some gibberish, and clearly all the waves you see are made out of particles. So that's how particles can be a wave. I mean, he knows that water's made out of atoms and the atoms are moving.
Unless you give up the idea that it's a particle and think, aha, this thing that I thought was a particle was actually a wave.
A wave in what? They won't say. Bent space. I mean, it's just so trivial and so silly. It's obviously not a wave because you're not matching the actual pattern and you never even did the real experiment. Why should I think electrons aren't particles merely because you didn't do an experiment and claim they are? I mean, that's really stupid of me.
A wave in an ocean? That's not a particle.
He'll say it now, maybe. Well, it's made of particles. Yeah.
The ocean is made out of particles.
Yeah, there you go.
But the waves in the ocean are not particles.
And obviously it would be silly to make, again, any analogy. No one says all 10 waves is a particle. So if you think of the individual wave fronts as nodes, and you make those the particles, and then put those through the experiment, then you can understand why phase matters.
And rocks are not waves. Rocks are rocks.
Right, but you can throw rocks at a frequency. I can shoot a gun every second, and there'll be bullets in space at a certain timed interval. So clearly rocks can make frequencies, and this is just about frequency. So again, they don't care about the notion of frequency at all. They're obsessed with wavelength because they're just obsessed with this idea of everything having to be a wave. They just don't think there's any such thing as a slingshot or a gun or a cannon. Apparently bullets just don't fit into their model of reality.
So a rock is an example of a particle. An ocean wave is an example of an ocean wave.
And this is just about frequency. Again, we know it's about frequency because it's about phase. So there's lots of ways to make a frequency. Again, I can just draw things on it. I can just draw dots on a piece of paper and I've made a frequency. There's no wave.
And now somebody's telling you a rock is like an ocean wave. What?
Back in the 1920s, when a version of this experiment was first done.
So he says it again. All right, a version of this experiment. It's not even close to a version of it. It's nothing. It's not the same experiment.
Scientists struggled to understand this wavy behavior. Some wondered if a single electron, while in motion, might spread out into a wave. And
some wondered, and you all fell for it. And for whatever dumbass reason, I can't even understand at all how this silly explanation wasn't as mockable as snake theory or whatever, raccoon theory or bear god. This is such a crude religion. It's so silly. It's like, why bother? You're modern humans. Why are you falling for something this vacuous and silly?
Physicist Erwin Schrödinger came up with an equation that seemed to describe it.
So Schrödinger didn't like what they did to his equation, by the way. So again, Schrödinger really is a big loser in this historical record because, just like Einstein, they're just putting his name on stuff that he would really hate you putting his name on.
Schrödinger thought that this wave was a description of an extended electron, that somehow an electron got smeared out, and it was no longer a point, but was like a mush.
There was a lot of argument about exactly what this represented.
Finally, a physicist
Silly arguments, no doubt.
named Max Born came up with a new and revolutionary idea for what the wave equation described. Born said the wave is not a smeared out electron or anything else previously encountered in science. Instead, he declared it's something that's really peculiar.
It's just silly. It's something not real. Some sort of imaginary mathematical construct of a probability known that it's flying around with some probability ESP. I mean, it's totally unphysical. It's a God of the Gaps, crappy, silly gremlin theory.
Probability wave. That is, Born argued that the size of the wave at any location predicts the likelihood of the electron being found there.
Where the wave is big, that's not where most of the electron is. That's where the electron is most likely to be.
And that's just very strange, right?
Oh, it's just silly. It's not strange, it's silly. It's a silly explanation. The simple explanation is surfaces are obstacles. The obstacles deflect the composite pieces of the photon. The photon's pieces go to different locations, and only at certain mathematical vectors is it possible for the phase to be put back to regular phase. And anywhere where it's not the same phase, you will not reconstruct the same monster. You'll make something Frankensteinish. So there's places where you'll make, a cat with 4 legs and 2 ears, and then there's places where you make, a cat with 4 ears and 2 legs, and blah blah blah.
So the electron on its own seems to be a jumble of possibilities.
Blah blah blah.
You're not allowed to ask, where is the electron right now? You are allowed to ask, if I look for the electron in this little particular part of space, what is the likelihood I will find it there? I mean,
so again, it's this idea that there's more than one outcome, no cause to the effect. It's just some bizarre effect by some bizarre rule maker. That's God, frankly.
That bugs anyone, anytime.
As weird as it sounds,
Yes, it sounds really weird. It sounds really preposterous. It sounds really extraordinary. You might as well be talking about UFOs and being anally probed and all that kind of crap. You might as well be telling me some kind of bizarre, silly story, because that's exactly what it sounds like, and your evidence is shit. So extraordinary claims, less than ordinary evidence. Your evidence is made up. The fact is you didn't do an electron experiment with 2 fucking slits. That's the fact. You're claiming you did something you didn't do. You certainly didn't do it in 1920.
this new way of describing how particles like electrons move is actually right. When I throw a single electron...
So again, there's no evidence, no evidence, no evidence. You can't throw a single electron. So that's another just, what the hell are they talking about?
I can never predict where it will land. But if I use Schrodinger's equation to find the electron's probability wave, I can predict with great certainty.
Right, so you can predict. So that this is another lie, right? Because we already know, that it's probabilistic, that the circumstance of the experiment provides different opportunities. The electron can bang into 1 other electron, it could bang into 2 other electrons, 3 other electrons, 4 other electrons. It can scatter more than once. And therefore, where it's going to go is dependent on how many times it gets scattered. And scattered from what position to what position. Where was it originally when it first scattered, and what angle was it going at when it scattered a second time? And all of that will decide the probability.
That if I throw enough electrons, then say 33.1% would end up here, 7.9% would end up there, and so on.
Right, and they don't know that by predicting it. They know that by watching it and getting the answer. So again, without getting the answer, they wouldn't know how to predict it.
These kinds of predictions have been confirmed again and again.
So that's just more of the same tripe, okay? We've done it all kinds of ways, and we've proven it, and it always works, and that's just made up. It never happened. It's just absolute nonsense.
Again by experiments.
No, it hasn't. So again, I'm just saying, you people are believing this crap, and it's horrible science. It's absolutely horrible. They're talking about, like some geologist talking about fossils he doesn't have. Oh yeah, I have a hole, this, that, I have the missing link, I have this, I have that. It's all in the back vault somewhere. He doesn't have any of this shit.
And so the equations of quantum mechanics turn out to be amazingly accurate and precise.
Okay, so it's just more nonsense. Yeah, oh sure, they're accurate and precise in the sense that, guess what? These symbols mean what's every condition of the circumstance. What is exactly everything and where is it? So yes, if you know everything about the roulette wheel, the spin, the speeds, the velocities of everything, and all the friction points, yes, you could actually predict. But you have to know everything.
So long as you can accept that it's all about probability.
No, it's all about frequency and banging into things and getting scattered. And that frequency means there's phase. And if you scatter the bits of things at a frequency, there'll be places where the bits will be back in phase and places where they won't. And it's just a fact. So anyway, that's it, I guess. Before they go to the next wacky segment. So it might be worth finding the whole video. I don't know where it is, but or what it was, or obviously it's a Brian Greene thing, so I guess I could look under Brian Greene. But just horrible. So again, I'm just saying that for the physicists not to admit that this is terrible evidence, this exaggeration thing, that's terrible science, that this is a terrible way to do science. It's a terrible argument to tell people they must believe this nonsense. There's no alternative. There's only two choices. It either goes through the opening or it crashes into the barrier. There's no deflections. I mean, to present the argument this badly, you have to argue that this is desperate, isn't it? I mean, if they had good physics, wouldn't they be using it? Wouldn't they be making great arguments? Wouldn't they be showing you the great evidence if it was great evidence? So, why are they showing you just animations? Why are they showing you all this crap when they could show you the real experiments and they could show you the real evidence? Because they don't have the real evidence in the first place, and the evidence they do have doesn't look anything like these simulations. And of course, it doesn't match. It's not the same pattern. And they don't care. Shouldn't that be sort of important that it's not the same pattern? If you're going to you're going to say two things are the same mechanism, shouldn't it actually be the same sound it's making? Come on. Just I'm sitting here pleading with you. Come on, people. Admit this is a desperate hope. This isn't science. This is wishful thinking. It's horrible. All right, well, there's no point in me re-emphasizing it. And this is like I said, all the big names will play along. Susskind played along with this piece of crap. This steaming piece of crap in terms of the horrible citation to evidence that doesn't exist. And they put their endorsement on it by being participants in it. So none of them know that there was no double slit experiment with electrons. None of them know that. It's not possible to make a slit narrow enough to confine an electron, unless you can manipulate actual single atoms. And even if you did single atoms, again, the electron is way far away from the nucleus and it's tiny. So how could it confine another electron? Well, it realistically can't, can it? I mean, it's just so dishonest. All right, well, that's probably enough. And such, and so forth and whatnot, but just so, You don't have to believe my counter theory. You just have to admit that, the current theory isn't well evidenced. And there's probably good reason to think there's a better theory, because this one isn't well evidenced. So anyway, till the next time, and such. So forth and whatnot.